How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to have a great discussion of working with the investigative division. Guys, this is a very important discussion because there are divides in our system. We know that, whether it's frontline and management, custody and civilian, custody and medical, but definitely custody and the investigative division. So the dialogue that we're going to have today with Joe Pomponio is basically how do we build a better road at understanding each other's perspective, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, what it is that we're trying to get done, and then basically try to maintain good relationships so we tend to help each other as opposed to being a conflict to each other. Because remember, guys, if we both have the same end game, we don't want to get in each other's way. So this dialogue will be great because it's about just kind of bringing about an appreciation for both sides of the coin. But we're going to try to do that through understanding what our job functions are. Now, guys, if you get a chance, please check out Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This book is available on the market, on Amazon. If you guys haven't gotten it, it's definitely a good read, so I would pick it up. It's used for training all across the country, and the link to that is in the description. We also have this book, How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned by Working in a Prison. Guys, this book, I just love the feel of this book in my hand, but this book has tons of advice in it. It's available through Blue 360 Media. Get your hands on this. This book will help you through this great career. It answers a lot of questions. And again, the link to that is in the description. I also have this new book that's coming out. So it's due out a couple of days, February 20th. This is just a printout version. But again, this is available, same company, Blue 360 Media. It's going to look a little like this, just a little bit smaller. And it's got more tips that's going to add to the other two books. This book covers some strategic stuff, but also touches on a lot tactical stuff. And again, it's available within a couple of days, so you can pre-order it right now. Link to that is in the description. It's through Blue 360 Media. And I'm also working on a daily reader. I think this is just going to be more strategic stuff, but it's going to be simple little passages that will be like January 1st all the way to December 31st. And it's just, I'm a little behind. I'm on January 27th or 28th, but I'm having fun. There's little quick little passages that you could pick up and read. I'm going to try to maybe make it into a little hardcover book that you just got to go through. And everything I put in these books, especially How to Succeed in Corrections and tips for new correction supervisors or tips for new correction officers and their supervisors, these are discussion worthy. So you basically read the passage and it's supposed to encourage discussion. All right, so let's get Joe. What up, Joe?
What up, brother?
Joe, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from Texas Department of Corrections, 30 years. Currently working in our local sheriff's department in the jail division and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
All right, Joe, and we love having you, of course. Now, Joe, obviously there's many different divides in corrections, from the cross-functional to the, frontline to management, whatever it is, all across departments, all levels up. So our job is we want to always try to bridge those gaps, because at the end of the day, if you look at what the house wants, if you look at that completed picture, it does require us working together. And even though we may touched on it before, I think definitely doing an episode on it now really matters, is there is a divide, Joe, between custody and between the investigative division. And before we get into the tips that we're going to provide, why do you think that divide exists?
Just due to persona and stigma, nobody. I can honestly say that I myself always had a great working relationship with the investigative division. Especially as a lieutenant, because we lean on them just as much as they lean on us. But the stigma was always there that the investigative division was there to catch the officers doing something wrong. And, that's not the fact. They're there to pursue cases and, assist us just as much as they are, labeled responsible for dealing with individuals that, don't, that fail to do their job or, or maybe corrupt or whatever the case may be. But, it's been a long-standing stigma between custody and what the, internal affairs, investigative division, whatever you want to call it. Every time they would come around, things would get tense, and there's no reason for it, because as long as you're doing your job with integrity, and we assist each other, because, when it comes to a situation, we definitely need each other.
I agree 100%. So, Joe, one of the things for me is the first thing I say when it comes to working with the investigation division, but also investigative division working with us, is do the right thing. I don't think doing the right thing is subjective. I
Nope.
don't. I think that once we understand first what the expectations of the house are, and then how we meet those expectations as a department. So in this case, how custody is supposed to meet those expectations, and how the investigative division is supposed to meet those expectations. That's how you decide what is the right thing, right? I mean, to me, that's what I do. I kind of see what's expected of us, and then I go ahead and I filter all my decisions based on those highest level of expectation. So if I was custody, and Joe, question I'll have you, if you don't mind, if you can answer first, is what do you think is the right thing for custody to constantly be doing?
Well, I mean, no matter what job you're doing, regardless of your, ID or if you're custody, integrity, performing your job functions with integrity is a must, regardless. Regardless, if you're doing your daily functions or if you're, assisting other departments, always perform your job with integrity. Custody should be doing everything within their power to ensure that, they're crossing their I or, crossing their T's, dotting their I's, making sure they got a good, clean, situation, looking at all the variables involved, looking at, possible outcomes, that shouldn't change how you do your job. That should, that should emphasize the way you do your job. Integrity plays an important role in everything that we do, especially in our scenarios, within the penal institutions, because, we're looked at so harshly, from the public and, the news media, is that, the way we perform our jobs it plays a big role. It plays a pivotal role in our outcomes. So, doing your job with integrity, making sure that you have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, making sure that, you've thought of every possible outcome, in order for a scenario to be completed.
Right. And guys, this is extremely important because a lot of times, this is where some of the divide comes, is that someone may do something wrong and the investigative division gets dispatched to investigate the issue. And sadly, because there's no counter influence, some of the staff may go ahead and embellish what they did, or maybe not be 100% truthful. And then the word starts spreading around that we're investigating people for stuff that is minor or superficial. And most of the time, we're not. But we also can't specifically tell you what we are doing either. So a lot of the times, the word just starts to spread around, in this case, let's say custody, that we're investigating this officer because, I don't know, he did something minor. And it turns out later on that it wasn't something minor. It was something huge. But unfortunately, we can't say anything. And therefore, there's no way to counter influence that rumor mill that's being spread. So I've always told people, when an investigation starts to happen, and if it's one of your peers that's being investigated, if you didn't do nothing, let the process roll itself out, and let's just see what happens in the end result, but let the process roll itself out. Because again, there could be many reasons why that investigation has to be done. It doesn't always mean that the investigation is being done to attack your integrity. It just be, and as we touch on later on, it could be just something that needs to be closed off. So they got to open something up and close it off as an exhausted effort. But for the people on the outside that know, like, oh, Joe's my boy, I can't believe he's being investigated, just let it ride out. Don't pass any judgment. Don't do anything until, the investigation's done, things are in people's hands, and we pretty much know at that point, because now maybe the information's a little bit more public. Okay, wow, this is what really happened. Because I had a lot of people that when there's an investigation going, they stand right by Joe because they believe Joe's story, and obviously administration and the investigative division can't say nothing. And then all of a sudden, all the facts start to come out. But in the process, we burned so many bridges before that because, man, why is the investigative division coming after him? That's crazy. That was bullshit what they're chasing after him for. Yeah, but you're only hearing the one side. And unfortunately, the other side can't say anything. And then later on, as I said, the investigation comes out and everybody has this crazy aha moment. And I'm not going to say you're going to go back and apologize to the investigative division or administration for, wow, I can't believe this is what happened. Sorry, we misunderstood. And thank you guys for doing your job. I mean, I don't expect to get all that, but I do expect for you guys to realize that some of the information that you run on, that you believe, administration or the investigative division is just attacking you, or attacking your fellow officer, turns out that it's not 100% accurate in what you believe it may be. There may be a lot more, but you're not obviously in the know of that. You're only in the know of what this person may be telling you. And if I could share a story with this, Joe, when I started doing Tier Talk years ago, I'm talking about when I was doing it on iTunes Radio or iHeartRadio, whatever it was, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, whatever it was. And this is going to kind of cross into understanding each other's role. I had a friend of mine that was an officer from the county jail. So this didn't happen at the state, but he was connected to who was paying me for the radio show, or who I was working for the radio show. He was a well-received officer. He was kind of connected to us, and we used to chat all the time. I mean, literally, we chatted all the time. And, I don't know, months later or maybe a year or so later, he gets suspended with pay for a possible investigation that's happening between him and an inmate, in which they said that he was abusing use of force. That's what they were getting him at. And that at this point, he was suspended with pay until they could do the investigation. Hold on, my earpiece fell out. So they could do the investigation to determine what happened. And obviously, guys, and we'll get to this, sometimes if they feel that while they're waiting for the facts, because God forbid this is true or not, you could still be a threat to other inmates, they usually suspend you with pay. It's never a good sign, but they usually do that because of the liability of keeping you around inmates. So while they're going through this, now, mind you, at this time, I was maybe just a sergeant or I don't think I've crossed into admin at this point because Tier Talk's been around since I was a supervisor, since I was a sergeant. So it's over a decade by now. So, of course, I'm listening to what this person's telling me, and I'm kind of believing that, administration is chasing after people for doing their job, and this is bullshit, and I'm believing everything he's telling me. And, of course, I'm trying to say, well, maybe you could try this perspective. And then eventually what happens is the investigation gets out. It's completed. It gets released to the public. So there's pictures and stuff out on the out in the media. And it's not what he told me. It literally, the inmate may have said something, but he pummeled the inmate. I mean, whatever the inmate said, it is what it is. But he pummeled the inmate. And I also believe that the inmate may have been secured as they were walking through the doing the escort. But either way, when you look at the pictures, there was definitely a verbal exchange, but it's clearly see that the officer made the first move, and then the other officers had to pull him off. It was crazy because if you look at the pictures, all the officers are holding on to him, and there's really nobody on the inmate, so you can kind of see where the aggressiveness is. Eventually, sadly, this is the sad part, that officer killed himself because he lost his job. Wow. And I actually still have some of his Facebook messages when he already was found guilty at this point, and he knew he was going to lose the job, and I couldn't sugarcoat it no more. It's like, hey, this is not what you told me. This is a whole different situation. I mean, now the whole argument's going to shift to maybe your emotional well-being, your mental well-being. But I think at this point, you're going to have to take the hit on this. This is clearly obvious that this is an aggressive attack on your end. And then I guess maybe some people, what happens here is they'll shift to their emotional wellness or whatever it was. But either way, he knew it was happening. And I forget if it was before or after he was finally removed, he did take his own life. But what I learned that day, and not to be cold, because I learn, I write, and I'm very introspective, is that we're not always told everything. We're always told what sells that best argument. So now, granted, I'm on the floor. Let's just say that this was me at the job, and I'm talking to this guy or whatever it is, and I believe everything he says. Now, mind you, the administrative part of it, the investigative division, they just can't just go in and talk to everybody about this guy's case. They can't. So all you're getting is the one side of the story, like kind of like the media. We always get mad because the media doesn't hear the other side. Well, same difference here. You're only getting the one side because the other side can't say anything. And then we hold this judgment. And then finally, when the truth really comes out, some of us still believe that the investigative division was corrupt, even though all the evidence is there. They just won't break away from what that initial belief was because, again, there was no counter influence. So at this point, they just justified it. Remember, if you don't have counter influence, you're going to start justifying what you're believing. And it just leads to a separation that, in my mind, tends to be unfair because at the end, there'll be some officers that will come up and say, yo, yeah, that he looked like he did a little more than he said he did. And at that point, what were we supposed to do? He can't be trusted around inmates. But Joe, do you agree that happens, that stories are told that tend to be very one-sided or beneficial? If you guys have unions, sometimes the unions could get an idea of what it is because they may not be fully in the know. And they could be passing a story out there that is not 100%, which winds up causing animosity back to the investigative division and the management. And next thing you know, the investigative division is doing the right thing, but they're being seen as being petty because they're the majority of the officers are going on the story that they're being sold.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts? I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't go both ways, but
yeah, it can. I mean, you gotta keep in mind that number one, there's two sides to every story. You got the victim, you got the aggressor, and somewhere in between, in the middle is the truth. It's always been that stigma that ID or IA is for the convicts and not for the bosses. No, it's not about that. It's about right and wrong. And that's on both sides of the fence. You're right and you're wrong. I've been investigated, I don't know, how many times in a 30-year career, and some of them I didn't even know about until it was done. It doesn't necessarily, an investigation doesn't necessarily, bring knowledge to people. They don't make you aware. I mean, sometimes, inmates can write a letter saying that, Lieutenant Pomponio is not feeding us. He's not doing this. He's not doing that. And, they'll look into the case and you don't necessarily actually know about it. There's tons of times where people are investigated and don't know about it, but one true fact still remains. As long as you're professional in your duties, you have integrity, doing your job, and you're factual, like you said, let the process play out. Because if the people truly know you, they're going to know. And other people's opinions really shouldn't matter to you anyway. If you did the right thing, you shouldn't be seeking justification from other people. You shouldn't be seeking, support from other people. A lot of the times, when people when they find out they're being investigated and they go to other people for support, it's because they did something wrong. They did something they're trying to get ahead of, and that's on you. When it comes to investigations, as long as you are doing your job the way you're supposed to be doing, let the process play out. It's going to come in your favor. Don't let it worry you, because you were professional. You did your job duty with integrity, and you did the right thing in the situation. There's always going to be allegations against you at some point in your career. The way you perform your job is key. It's key to any situation. It's key to public image. It's key to the investigative division. It's key to the administration. It's key to your coworkers, and it's key to your subordinates. Mm-hmm. People get investigated all the time. And sadly, there are times where people are investigated and has this outcome. People lose their jobs, and it's because they didn't do it with professionalism. They didn't do it with integrity. They didn't do the right thing in that situation. Now I'm not saying that, we're not prone to mistakes. We're going to make mistakes, but as long as we had our heart in the right place when we made this decision, and it wasn't, something that was going to cause bodily harm or put somebody in physical jeopardy, or, the investigative division understands that. They know that we're human. We're going to make mistakes, but they're looking for the criminal aspect of it.
Yeah.
Not just because we made a mistake. They're looking at the criminal aspect. And if our mistakes and our decisions don't have any kind of criminal intent or criminal implications, you got nothing to worry about. Like I said, they understand we make mistakes. Hell, I made plenty of mistakes. My subordinates made plenty of mistakes. That's part of the learning process. But you shouldn't let other people's opinions of you, because you're under investigation, influence the way you do your job. As long as you're doing it correctly to begin with, you have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and mind you, I like what Joe said. That you got the administrative, you got the criminal, you got the civil. Most likely the internal affairs divisions are looking for things that are more criminal. But if you do have an incident where the violations of policy led to something criminal, they're going to be interested in that as well. Like, you can have a guy that doesn't do count all night and it's seen on video and nothing happened, no inmate dies or nothing, and the internal affairs may say that's just an administrative issue. But if by chance that happens again and there is a guy that died, that's no longer going to be an administrative issue, because the consequences of the death now could become criminal. So they're going to be looking at everything. They're going to be reading those policies, see where you failed, and go ahead and hit it with as much as they could, because they got to present the case to the prosecutor. Now, granted, I like what you said about not everybody, you may not even know you're under investigation. That's so true, because a lot of times inmates know what to say to create liability. And most of the time it could be an effort to play a game, but that doesn't mean that we don't look into it. We have to look into it, Absolutely. So what we tend to do is we have to close those areas of concern. So let's just say, even if there is a moment where they wind up having to call you, let's just say Joe mentioned this great thing, and I don't know if I would use, let's say, internal affairs for, but in what you were saying before, maybe I got a guy that's not feeding an inmate, or that's what the inmate's making the allegation, that he's not being fed. So he says it's about an officer not feeding him. Fine. I send the sergeant or the lieutenant to look over it, because I'm allowed to go one level up. I mean, that's what I have my supervisors there for. As long as I go one level up, and the supervisor goes to talk to the officer starts flipping out, because they're like, "Why? Can't believe you're looking into this. This is bullshit." Because I do my job, and we're not doing it to attack you. We're doing it because we know you're doing it. We probably have you on camera doing it, but we have to close this off, because God forbid this inmate decides that later on they want to sue and they want to talk about all the things that we never do. All of a sudden we could say, hey, wait a second. When he mentioned this concern, we did have these concerns looked into, and these were the results. I mean, I know sometimes that's not always expressed in what we do, because obviously we can't, always tell people, hey, by the way, Joe, we know you feed the inmates. We're just going to run this through, and just kind of just keep something moving. No, we got to treat it with integrity as well. But I think a lot of people don't realize most of the stuff we do. I think about 99% of what we do is to close out loopholes that could later eventually go into an inmate's favor who has been constantly documenting false allegations. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Even in Texas, at one point, they were telling the staff, any employee who received 10 or more grievances was going to be referred to the investigative division for investigation. And you think the offender population didn't know that? Oh my God. Grievances were coming in left and right at that point, because they were trying to get the officers that were actually doing their job and keeping things under check, trying to get them out of the way so they can go back to being a convict and getting away with what they were getting away with. The grievances were sent off. A lot of them had to be answered. They all had to be answered, but a lot of the times, a lot of the grievances were kicked back by the investigative division, with no criminal action found, refer to unit administration for disposition. you know, and then from there we just go through our normal criminal, you know, our normal grievance procedures, you know, but they still have to be answered, you know, and the convicts know, the inmates know the key words to start an investigation. And you're absolutely correct. You know, a officer with integrity and who's a good officer, does her job every day. You know, you go down there or you call them to the office, say, hey, you know, so and so put this grievance on you, saying this as, and they flip out. Whoa, easy. I'm just letting you know that you know, I know you're doing your job. I've already reviewed the cameras. I seen you doing your job. You did exactly what you said you were doing. So what I need for you to do is answer this grievance.
Yeah.
When you're done, give it to me. I'll put the supporting evidence with it, and it's done. I said, but you got to understand, this is part of your job. You're going to be answering these things all your career. You're going to be answering these all your career. So, you know, stay calm. As long as you didn't do anything wrong, there is nothing to flip out over.
Yeah, because and Joe, you're right, because most of the time administration will find themselves in court anyway. I mean, we run the House, so obviously.
I mean, hell, I think I still got like 7 pending lawsuits against me from 20 years ago that are still waiting to go to court. I mean, people don't understand. Inmates have nothing but freaking time on their hands.
And people pick up these cases no matter how crazy it is. And I always try to tell, like what you said, let's say the custody members, whoever's being investigated on you know, maybe the interview process, is like, hey, listen, if you didn't do nothing wrong, you got to look at the questions as questions of curiosity and not judgment. Because I fell into that once. I had an issue one time where this inmate was just playing this game, and I was doing my job, and it's clearly documented. And I got caught up in it because I wasn't mad at the investigative division.
No,
this inmate was able to inconvenience me to be interviewed. And the funny thing is, administration, right? You figure, okay, we know why it's all being done, and we do. But you know what? For a moment, I felt that I lost a level of control.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's what got to me. I think that's what gets to a lot of the staff at that moment.
My first case that wound up in federal court was over a radio, over an inmate's radio. You know, he never went through the grievance process. He never said anything. He went straight to the courts. This thing actually made it to the courts without any kind of
exhaustive measure,
exhaustive measures whatsoever. And, you know, I got to go 3 hours to a federal court to testify over a damn radio, you know, and, you know, an inmate's going to find a way to inconvenience you, and they can tie several people up doing it. You know, it's just the nature of the game. But again, you know, it all comes back to, did you do your job? Did you do it with professionalism? Did you do it with integrity? Again, let the process play out. One way or the other, the judge is going to see through it. And the these kind of cases don't even involve the investigative division. Hell, the investigative division gets sidestepped, go straight to a court.
Yeah.
You know, but it doesn't lessen the burden of what the investigative division has to do. They have a job to do just like we do.
Oh, they're going to be under scrutiny in the courts as well for the investigative process, and then the administration and the agency for the results and what they done and how they dealt with whatever. You know what's funny? You mentioned a good point though, to Joe. If we're all together, think about this though. So a lot of these things may not always make it to court. Sadly, some of them settle out, which I'd rather go to court, but I know it's more money. And I get that side of the business. I do. You know, you can invest all this money to put up a case when it may be just cheaper just to settle it out. And I wish we wouldn't make the decision that way, because I think long term it would be better for us to go to court and spend that money up front. But having said that, sometimes we just get relieved that we don't have to go through the process, whatever. But if we're all together, we go up as a united case. But what winds up happening is we all wind up presenting it in like survival mode, where you know, the investigative division gets questioned about their investigation, and it's like, well, I did this, and then we went ahead and gave it to admin, but I'm not in charge of what admin decided to do with it. And then admin will be like, well, wait a second, you know, these areas weren't covered in the investigation, so they were sent back. It's like, guys, after the investigation is done, And now we finally commit to an action of whether it's to absolve somebody or because you can get sued on the back end of an officer losing their job. I mean, it is what it is. We have to be united in what that outcome is. So again, the Internal Affairs gives us this great investigation, which gives us enough information to make a decision. Whatever, I'm going to be honest with you. When I look at a great investigation, it's sad to say, like, I'm not saying that, if there's an officer that did something wrong, and the investigation shows that, oh, that's good to you, Gange. A great investigation gives me help with the decision I need to make. So yes, I want all evidence put my way, and I want a good investigation because I'm going to have to make a decision. And one, I want to alleviate liability, so I want to make the right decision. But two, I want my decision to be strong enough even through the appeal process, because if I feel that there's something weak in the subsequent appeal process that can happen later on down the line, like Joe or someone said 5 years, I want to fix all that. And if I can't stand tall for an eventual appeal process, I want to revisit everything that we're doing. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want a good, clean, factual, investigation because it helps you make a better decision as the determination. You want something that's going to stand up in the court because, anybody who's been in federal court behind an investigation, I can tell you personally, if you have a sloppy investigation going into court, it is not a pretty picture. They will tear you apart on the stand. We should be pushing for good, clean investigations anyway, regardless of the outcome. We want something that's going to hold up in court. We want something that's going to be factual, clean, that's smooth in the transition process. If it goes from ID to a court, we want something that a prosecutor can use. And if it's for us and we're defendants, we want something that our attorneys can use. We don't want to show up in court with something that's going to get laughed out because of a sloppy investigation. Everything that you put on paper has the propensity to be used in court, and it's got to be a good investigation.
Yeah, and a great investigation is really determined by the effort, not the outcome.
Absolutely.
100%. Like I want information because I need to make a decision, and that decision has to hold weight through the test of time because it will be challenged. And if I tend to lose something at the highest level of appeals, I'll guarantee you it won't be something surface. I mean, that's the big thing. It won't be something surface. It'll be something that's really deep in the bed of it all. And it's funny because even when we talk about this, I've noticed something too. When you have people that tend to have do foolish things, they spend most of their time arguing the due process and not actually the behavior that they're being accused of. Yep. So sometimes due process holds weight, but sometimes it really doesn't. It really does depend on where the violation is. If it's a due process and evidence collecting, that's a problem. That's 100% a problem. But if it's a due process within a time parameter, there may be some forgiveness on this depending on what the situations are. But if the evidence said you did it and, we gave you a charge 5 days late and you want to argue the time of you being given the charge and spend your argument on that and not to contest the evidence because the evidence is solid, I'll guarantee you that 5 days late, it's not going to hold any weight. But now, granted, there's a violation, and we'll get to that in the due process of evidence collection. That's a problem. That's a problem, especially when that gets passed over to the prosecutor, and they're like, "What just happened here?" So remember on this part here, when it comes to understanding the roles, it is liability here too. It's making sure that on the back end, more in the long term, that we're protecting the house, which includes everybody who's doing their job the correct way. So when I think liability, I think long-term. And sometimes when people get investigated, and I know they're doing the right thing, but they have to get investigated, when time allows, I'll call them back and tell them what the long-term plan of that was. I didn't mean to inconvenience with that, or inconvenience you with that, but be advised, these are things that can hit us 5-6 years later down the line where none of us even remember this. So the more information I have, and the more consistent with my efforts, because they'll ask you a situation. And the reason why this does relate, guys, is because the investigative division is usually handed investigations from administration. So understanding their role is also understanding the process of how they may get something outside of stuff that they could pick up on their own through intel. But, understanding the long-term process, because years later, you're not going to remember these incidences, and you're going to pretty much be saying, go to the report. Go to the report. What does the report say? I can't remember things from yesterday, let alone 6 years down the line. What does the report say? Is that what it said? Okay, fine. And I found out this to be true too. For custody, for anybody in this position, as best as you can. And I'm not saying, I want to make sure that's your cat. So you got to be consistent with making sure you cover all areas that can relate to liability. Yeah, we got to interview her.
Yeah, Duke says do the right thing. Just do the right thing.
Do the right thing. Seems like she was squealing a little bit already. Who's interviewing her? So basically, you got to be wary that there always could be that liability. So for me, I'm very consistent, not to the point that I'm paranoid, but I'm very consistent in making sure I cover all those areas. So if I'm asked something later on, and I may not recall the specific inmate or the specific incident, I could still go back and confidently say, listen, I may not remember this incident, but if this incident was coming my way today, these are probably the measures I would take, but let's look at the reports. And the reports will usually say, that's what I did. So I think even the investigations, when they're done, because we all can get investigated at any time, is they look for the loopholes to make sure that all the dots are connected, just in case later on things could be thrown out in court. And I want people to understand one more thing, and I think Joe would agree with this. Most of the investigations that are done are sometimes done, as I mentioned, in an effort to absolve the agency or absolve the staff member. And a lot of people don't see that. They may just see, oh, man, I'm being investigated again. Damn it. Why are they always coming after me? And basically, they're not coming after you. They're trying to help you. So, you have a good defense, because I'm going to tell you something. If you got an officer that's accused of something, right, and they go to court and they have to present their case, it's excellent if they have an investigation next to that says that their case was unfounded. And that basically, here's another thing, and not only was it unfounded, the inmate was charged for falsifying documentation. What's your thoughts on that perspective? Because I don't think that's that much.
People don't. A lot of the officers, a lot of the supervision that's been investigated, don't understand that. A lot of times that things have already been referred to the investigative division, and investigative division has looked into everything, looked at all the evidence, looked at the video footage, looked at whatever. And sent a letter back saying that there was no criminal actions found. Everything was in accordance with agency policy. And, the person being investigated doesn't even know it. Just because you're called into court on an allegation, the investigative division at that point is there for you. The supervision, your lawyer, everybody's there for you. Yes, you're the one sitting in the hot seat. You're the one being accused. We all get butt hurt over it. I understand, but you got to understand that you're not in it alone. You got a lot more support than you think you have.
Yeah, and you know what, Joe? You know what you're 100% correct on too is the agency. And even the investigative division, the department itself. Remember, guys, we got to move away from generalized assumptions. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that are watching it that may have had a problem with the investigative division or whatever it is. But most of the time, you could probably narrow it down to a few. And then if there was a problem at that initial level, most likely those inconsistencies will never carry out if you follow through with an appeal process. But granted, there are people that do abuse their position of authority. I get it. But let's just talk about what these departments are supposed to represent. The investigative division is supposed to represent the highest level of integrity. But mind you, guys, if I'm running the prison, I don't want bad officers to be discovered. I want them cleared. I mean, I don't see why people would think that I want to chase after someone in the hopes that they fucked up, because now I'm intertwined with that. So now I immediately have to react. I have to separate myself from that individual, but also separate the house from that individual who's done something wrong. And I don't want to do that. To me, that's in conflict with what would hold weight later in court. I want to be able to have an investigation that clears that individual, so then I could bring them closer and we can defend this as a house. Because again, when you're administration, I can't delegate responsibility, and I'm responsible for that officer. 100%. I'm responsible in what they've done and the consequences that must be carried out if they've done something foolish. So to be honest with you, I don't want that person to be found guilty of anything. But if they have done something, then we got to handle it. But I know people are thinking like, oh yeah, administration comes after us all the time. You think administration, if I'm running a house, do you think it looks good that I'm getting all these investigations and I'm cleaning house all the time because all my people are corrupt and doing foolish shit? A lot of people may think that looks good. You're cleaning house, you're cleaning house, you're cleaning house. You're a reflection of the house.
Absolutely. That's what I was just fixing to say. Damn straight.
What do you got there, Joe? Hey, I see the
number. It may look good publicly that you're cleaning the house, but at some point it's a direct reflection of the leadership involved.
Oof. And as I said, so for some people that think, and again, I can't speak for everyone, I'm only speaking from my experience and people I've worked with, it does break my heart, but also gets me, anxious when all of a sudden I have an investigation, it goes out, and all of a sudden it's not where I wanted it to be. Because unfortunately, the trust I put in somebody was violated, and now it puts stress and anxiety. And then the other sad thing about it all, too, and this may be where my paranoia comes in, Joe, is if I see a failure at one level, it makes me think, in how many other areas are we failing? So if I got a bad use of force, let's say that I caught, on camera, whatever it is, in my mind, I start to think, well, do I have 10 other ones? Yep. Oh my God. And, so there is a bit of, and the liability of it all. So I love when an allegation's made and everything's reviewed and it comes back and say custody did what they needed to do. Everything's good. Fine. As long as I got that investigation to lean on, man, I will do whatever I can to support. And that's one less stress on our end, because again, as Joe mentioned, I mentioned, you cannot separate your responsibility from that house. So if there is shit going on that's wrong, you are connected to that, especially at the highest of levels. So again, understanding the investigative function on that, just kind of went a little sideways, but it still all connects, is knowing that they're investigating liability to clear someone, but remember, their approach has to be neutral because they're evidence gatherers. They can't approach with a bias. They can't approach going in where, oh, I know Joe fucked up, I'm going to come at Joe, or I know Joe is good and we're going to absolve him. They got to come in with this level of curiosity on an objective scale. They got to come in and let me look at the incident because I don't know if Joe's good or not, and let's be objective. And those questions should be built right off the bat on curiosity. They're supposed to be an objective investigation. And what they do is they collect everything and they forward it up to the person who's going to make the decision of what it is that they would like to do. If they're collecting something criminal and they're going to bring it up to the prosecutor, they got to make sure that the evidence gives enough for the prosecutor to hold the case. And if by chance they're doing an administrative investigation on policy, which could happen, they could do those sometimes. If the administration is looking for a real good, thorough investigation, the administration is going to expect evidence to give them support on a decision. Yep. That's the key of it all. Hey, Joe, let's also talk about and this kind of touches into it, the departmental politics. So this is a tough one because as much as we need custody to get involved with intelligence gathering and helping us out and pushing information to the parties that need it, that's part of the filtering process. Because, by the way, what people collect on that front line may be your intelligence gathering, but that's only part of the investigative division's intelligence gathering. That's one part of many. They still got to confirm. I mean, they're building cases that don't just come through one channel of intelligence gathering. And sometimes what happens is sometimes custody get mad because, well, we're giving up stuff and they're not giving us anything. And it's because, in my experience, some of them would want to, but they would be afraid of violating a due process for an investigation that was ordered, let's say, by the prosecutor, who is going to tell them, hey, I want you to collect whatever evidence you can, but at this point, I want this to be done discreetly, because we're trying to build a case. So with that said, you collect the information. Sometimes custody may say, well, hey, can we know more? I've given you a bunch of stuff. Can we know? And it's like, hey, I don't mean to be rude, but I can't, because it's still an ongoing investigation and we're only a piece of it. So I'm not in a position to give you, where your information's going. Now, granted, if there is an immediate security concern, they have to act. I mean, I want people to know that they have to act, because at that point, safety and security is going to supersede evidence collecting any day of the week. But granted, there is another conflict here. Is their job is to collect as much evidence they can until, at some point, they got to make sure they have enough evidence. But if at any point they feel that there could be a safety and security concern immediately, they're going to jump on that immediately and worry about due process later, with evidence collecting, because we were doing this and I found out that this could pose a threat immediately. So at this point here, we need to act immediately. And then you'll see all resources going towards preventing whatever that potential threat would be. Or if by chance, what they're investigating possibly gets leaked out. And sometimes that can happen. Sometimes, I'm working a unit, an inmate could tell me something that, maybe they're informant, I don't know, but all of a sudden, I listen to their intel and I start making some adjustments in what I'm doing. And unfortunately, those adjustments start messing with an ongoing investigation. Now, the internal affairs could call that officer in and say, hey, listen, hey, you got to work with us. This is what we got going on. But that may cause them to breach confidentiality. And they may say, you know what, guys, we're going to have to pull back because we can't go any further because it looked like the source messed up, told somebody. And that's why, one last thing, Joe, and I think you may know this too. That's why if there's anything, I'll give an example. Let's say undue familiarity. Let's say there's administration's made aware that a letter or Joe Pomponio is too close to a female inmate. Before administration makes the call to do anything or to separate anyone or to do whatever it is, they may go ahead and talk to the investigative division to see if they're building a case. Because the last thing they want to do is undue familiarity could take some time to prove. So they're collecting evidence and evidence. All of a sudden, you pull the person and their whole case is screwed because they haven't been able to collect the evidence to connect them. So all of a sudden, the administration may say, hey, you guys, hey, we're almost there, guys. Can you give us a little time? Okay, hold on. And then we may have to go back to, it's like, hey, guys, I'm sorry here. Keep the inmate where they're at and, let's just not mess with anything. And all of a sudden, custody's upset. Well, this is bull. You're not making any effort to move the individual. It's like, yeah, but guys, you have to be wary at this point here. There could be something going on, and that measure to move could jeopardize the investigation. And the funny thing is, deep down inside, everybody knows that. You find a letter or you find something that requires an immediate reaction, and that immediate reaction doesn't happen. A lot of people think administrations become soft. Okay, maybe, could be, maybe. Or maybe there's a bigger picture you don't know about.
Yep, absolutely.
What's your thoughts on that, Jugs? I see you in agreement with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been involved in a few investigations where, say like dirty officers. We don't. Everybody on the shift knows that this officer's dirty. I know the officer's dirty. We got the officer under investigation, but we don't do anything to separate the dirty officer from the inmate. Why? Because we're letting the process play out. We're building evidence. We're gathering evidence. The shift doesn't understand that. They look at you like, why the hell do you let this dirty boss keep coming back to work? Because we're giving them just enough lead to let us do what we need to do. That's why, when it comes to working with the investigative division, a lot of them loved working with me because whenever a situation arose, I would confer with them just to make sure nothing was going on investigation wise. And then I would kind of give my heads up as to what I had. And, before they would even ask, I would have, a CD with phone calls on it or, pictures, whatever the case may be, because to me, is you want to give them all the tools that they need to do their job properly as far as evidence wise, so, giving them what they need and the tools to work with makes the process streamlined. It goes smoother. But a lot of people don't understand that, even though somebody may be doing something wrong, it may be blatantly obvious. It may be blatantly, they may be blatantly guilty. We carry out our acts the way we do for reasons. It's not, because we're turning a blind eye to it. We're not. We're letting the process play out for a reason.
Yeah, and Joe, what's great about what you said? So when you invest resources in an investigation, or especially if you're giving something over to a prosecutor, they want to be able to hold it at the highest level of accountability. Yes. And I think what happens here is the greater the time for the collection matters, because it allows for less loopholes to be thrown out later on. For example, I'm a dirty cop. I come in. I give a bag of stuff to an inmate. That's the evidence we collect. We see the exchange. It gets brought to court. And then, I wind up I lose my job because, yes, you have the policy with me giving them something that's a bit of a violation there in case of there's something from the outside. But they haven't been able to prove what I've given them. Or they haven't been able to determine that I even knew what I gave him. These things matter. And now the problem is the person no longer has a job, and that's a win in itself, but they're not being held accountable because we weren't able to produce a pattern of that behavior enough to say, hey, you did know. And even if you want to say you didn't know today, you knew the other days when you were doing it. So to be honest with you, the court system is really made, and I get it, in favor of the person being accused. Because 51% has got to be from the person making the allegation, if you know what that means, in this case here. So if you have someone that's corrupt, the prosecutor's got to be able to produce 51%. That's a hell of an argument.
What we call preponderance of evidence.
Preponderance of evidence, right. And that's a lot. So that does take time. And I think what happens here is when people are developing the case, in their head, they're thinking, okay, you know what, we got this today, but what about if they ask this or they ask that? So we got to do this again. We got to do this again. And most of the time what it is even if they don't have the perfect incident, there's another incident or there's another one. If I could just catch one, that's foolproof. So unless, again, it poses a threat or whatnot, or there's a concern that it could be breached, which could mess up the whole investigation in general, most of the time they let certain things play out. And I think, again, I think custody kind of knows that or understands it. But unfortunately, sometimes, I don't know if it's ego or pride could get in their way because they may have committed to a lot of work and effort. And now it becomes a win-loss, especially if, how the inmate reacts to if there was discipline or consequence that now has been. I mean, I've seen inmates that are informants and they're good at what they do. And then the officer writes them up, finally catches them, writes them up. And then the inmate, literally beats the charge and then kind of rubs it in the officer's face. And now the officer's pissed. It's a win-loss. It's an emotional, I'm pissed, and this inmate has no problem if they're, sometimes they're foolish. And I've seen this happen too, by the way. So let's say I'm an inmate, I'm an informant, and I'm strategically placed somewhere. And, I do something foolish. The officer does their job, write me up, and the next day I'm out back into what I'm doing because there's a case going on. And then I kind of see Joe and I kind of rub it in Joe's face. If word gets out, at least from the investigative divisions that I've worked with, that informant plays that game and tries to minimize the control that officer has, that informant is done.
Yep.
They will not allow their informant to circumvent the control that custody must have to maintain control of that unit. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah. And I've seen that a few times in my career too, where a CI is, testified in something against him, and because he was a CI and was giving information on other people, they ultimately beat the charge, and they can't help themselves but to go back and for, I guess, lack of a better term, rub their nuts on the officer, and causes, man, that causes so much hatred. I mean, I can't, just the amount of hatred, I can feel it building in me just thinking about it, because I've had it done to me before, even when I was an officer. But it's one of those, it's a lesser of two evil type situations,
longer term picture.
The longer term outcome, how many dirty people are we getting out because of this CI, or how many drug busts have we made because of this CI, the longer term.
And Joe, you made a good point where the longer term is not always immediate. It's more further out. So unfortunately, the custody staff, whatever it is that put the effort into that charge, whatever it was, won't see the immediate result of the benefit of why that charge had to be dropped. At that point, their thing is, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, why is this guy back in my unit? And again, granted, it's we're not talking about extremes. There are certain things that an informant will do that they will not have protection.
Right.
But and, more of the little things.
Anybody that has any longevity with the agency or the penal institution, when they see that type of scenario happen, where, especially where the inmate's brought back to his own living area after he was run out, they kind of understand, and they kind of, okay, all right, I already know what's going on here. Anybody with any kind of longevity kind of understands the game. It's typically your rookie officers, and I would say 2 to 3, maybe 4-year vets that have a hard time with it, because they're still in that initial trying to do the right thing, and some of them are trying to be RoboCops, and when they write one up and they just come right back to the living area like nothing ever happened, they tend to take that to heart, and it takes them a few years. It kind of takes a few years to get into that aha moment. Okay, all right,
Joe. That is so spot on. And can I add something else to that? Because that is spot on. You made me think of something right now. Don't forget, if that inmate is really needed, and we're talking about minor charges, it shouldn't be major charges that they're getting forgiven for, because if they pose a threat, no one's going to waive on and say, nope, I know he assaulted an officer, put him back in the unit. No, we shouldn't be doing that. That even the investigative divisions will be like, nah, then fuck it. I'm not, this guy's a risk. Eventually we got to find another informant. But the funny thing is, if it is something petty and the inmates are aware that, well, that inmate was written up, that's funny. Why is he back on the unit? Because don't forget, you got to make an effort to protect the inmate as well from the other inmates. So it's going to be like, the reason why the inmate's back on the unit is because the officer wrote a shitty charge.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but because if they don't do that, because the inmates also expect consequences, and when there's not a consequence, they got to figure it out. And usually, a due process error, or they'll say the officer wrote something, or whatever it is, they're going to make it look like.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that too. I would send it. I would let them know, hey, it was a technical procedural error on the case. You didn't word the preamble just right, or you left this out, and he was able to get this tossed out on the technicality.
But no, obviously, I want to mention something here, just so we know, we're not talking about safety and security charges.
Right.
We're talking about more of the lower level charges.
Yeah, he had a clothesline hanging up after hours when he wasn't supposed to, or some small charges. Obviously something big. Yeah, I'll stand behind that all day long. But
and I also believe the investigative division, once they know what they're charged with, if they know it's something, especially if it's an attack on staff or something like that, or a threat to another inmate, depending, they're not going to risk releasing the informant out, because don't forget, somewhere along the line, whatever efforts are being made are documented somewhere, somewhere. I mean, so for me, I always have good relationships. So I go on the word of my division. If they need something, I go on their word. I trust them like you wouldn't believe. I do. I know them. I trust them 100%. I don't ask for documentation. What do you need?
Yeah.
Because I know they're helping me. I
Absolutely.
do.
Yeah.
And then later on, when it's free, if I have to explain to whoever, I'll make sure they're okay with it, and I do what I got to do. But I know that ultimately what they're trying to do is make the facility safer. So, if I could be a part of that, I want to be a part of it, and then I can stand tall. And if I have people that may disagree, it's okay, because I know what the greater purpose is, because I've been privy for the trust of what that may be. But having said that, for the people that may not know what that end result is, sometimes they look at the person that's asking it and saying, you know what, I got you. You don't even have to tell me what it is.
Yeah.
I don't, because I'll do that too. You know what, Joe? It's you. What do you need?
Yeah.
I don't care. Tell me what you need. And if I can't make it happen, I'll tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. That, and preserving the integrity of investigation is key, especially keeping things close to the vest, not letting word get out. Don't discuss it with anybody. Because you don't want to hamper the investigation. And the more people that know, it's more people that's subject to be recalled to court to testify,
Right?
Just based on he said, she said, or hearsay. I've seen that happen. I've seen 27 people called into court because the supervisor couldn't keep his mouth shut during an investigation that Internal Affairs was running. And when it finally went to court, the prosecutor had to call in 27 people behind hearsay. Because one person, the sergeant told one person, this person told, hey, guess what Sarge just told me? Hey, guess what so-and-so just told me? Sarge told them. And it spiraled out of control. All it does is muddy the waters. If you're entrusted with an investigation or entrusted with being part of an investigation, keep it to yourself. Don't discuss it with anybody. Preserve the integrity of the investigation, because the less people involved, the better.
I'm actually, I'm going to take a thought from what we got right now for January 28th, because sometimes I think we hit something just now that I think matters before we get to the next two tips. Maybe this is like a little bit of a bonus tip. So a lot of people that may be watching this will kind of think about the times that they could have been burned by, let's say, an individual. And remember, we talked about how they can kind of generalize that out as if that's a representation of the department. Maybe what I would tell people at first, and I don't think this is naive, I think it's an effort to understand how we all connect to each other. I'm going to say this: trust the function of the department. And what I mean by department, I don't mean the generalized, the higher level. I mean the specific department. Trust their function, and then if you know what their function is, because again, let's say Joe's a shitty investigator and he's more concerned about solving a case, and unfortunately he's put all these resources in, the case isn't going his way, and he doesn't know when to fold. So he's going to keep on chasing and chasing. Confirmation bias. He's no longer objective, right? Now, all of a sudden, I look at Joe. I'm pissed off at Joe. So I bring it up to, well, that's what the investigative. No, it's not. It's not. And there will be someone that will hold Joe responsible, because someone will say, hey, this wasn't about win-loss. You wind up burning more resources chasing a bad hand. Yeah, that's what you did. I get, you having some good cards at the beginning, but when you knew you were losing, why didn't you fold? And now this is a personal case. And I think the investigators are trained in, yes, when to chase, but also more importantly, when to let go. Don't let pride get in the way of that. You got to let go. And I think for me, I think I thought of it just now when you were saying your thoughts is, I have trust in what those departments represent. I have trust in what those functions are.
Yeah, you got to trust the process. I watched an investigator and a lieutenant lose their job over baby powder. They took a white powdery substance off an offender, tested it for everything under the sun, and told the investigative division that, hey, it didn't test positive for nothing. They sent it off anyways to the DPS crime lab, tied it up in a crime lab, spent $1,500 on a narcotics test just for it to come back and say it was baby powder. And, they're like, are you freaking serious? We paid $1,500 for a bag of freaking baby powder. Man, get the hell out of my office. You're done. You got to trust the process. Don't go chasing a ghost, man. If you're chasing a win for the wrong reasons, man, you will never have a good outcome.
Yeah, I'm actually going to put something like generalized animosity that bastardizes the process based on an individual's
need for conviction.
Yeah, or just in general, individuals' corrupt acts, whatever. I don't know if corrupt's too high of a word, but at least it's better than putting nuts on someone's face. You know what I mean? Whatever that one was. Hey, Joe. So this kind of crosses into the last two, but this one right here, developing a working partnership. So now listen, Joe, I want to have you go first on this, Joe, because this is where we want to develop a working partnership, but I don't think it's ever going to be a 50-50 partnership. I want people to realize that, because there's lines here that may prevent us from really being that 50-50 partnership. And it's not the fault of the investigative agency, nor is it the fault of custody. But this may be a little unique, and maybe it's the first time I'm saying this. We have to understand what that investigative function is and what the confidence in doing an investigation. So we may not be always able to get, or subjectively, because this is really how it's perceived, 100% of their efforts in maybe, let's say, sharing intelligence. But with that said, I still think that we need to give 100%. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Am I wrong, or because this is a tough one?
You're absolutely correct. I mean, custody. I would say it was more like a 70-30. But we're still responsible for giving 100% of that 30. Once we gather what evidence and what tangible stuff that we can put our hands on to forward to investigative division, it's on them to give 100% of their 70% to get that conviction. Right, good, bad, or indifferent. It's their responsibility. Nevertheless, you got to have that working relationship with them. You got to have that trust in them to do their job, just like they trust us to give them the tangible evidence in order to, secure a charge, secure a conviction. Either way it goes, we still have to have that working relationship with investigative division, because they lean on us for evidence and we lean on them to do the investigation. Both parties, both sides, regardless of who has the higher advantage or not, still required to have 100% of involvement, 100% of initiative, 100% integrity into what we pass. And you got to know right off the bat that, once the investigative division gets all this from you and they say, thank you, we'll start working on it, they're not always going to be able to supply you with details, because they have integrity of the investigation to uphold on their end too. And again, the less people involved, the better.
Yeah. And Joe, if I can add something, what I do expect in regards to what the investigative division can give back to us is, if I'm giving you information, I expect 100% effort in an outcome that must happen.
Absolutely.
And that's regardless of what you're chasing.
I've had times where, investigative divisions come back to me and said, hey, Lieutenant, everything that you did, that report that you wrote, all the evidence that you gathered, everything that you forwarded to us, man, we were able to get a conviction quick. We were able to get this to the court quick. We were able to secure the charge. They won't let you know what's going on during the process, but once it's finished, I've had quite a few of them come back and thank me, and the end of the situation, and not that it really matters, but it's good to know that the investigative division appreciates the effort that custody puts into what they forward to them. And, custody appreciates the fact that investigative division thought of us enough to call us back and let us know, hey man, y'all did a damn good job on this investigation. The evidence was great. Chain of custody was awesome. You made our job a hell of a lot easier. We got the charge, we got the conviction. Man, just jam up job.
Right. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. That this partnership, as we're talking about from that perspective, what we just highlighted, should definitely be something that we at all levels should understand from both sides. Because again, there is a needed result, yes, but there may be reasons why you may not feel the investigative division is being 100% with you, but we just kind of told you these could be the reasons. Because the last thing you want is if I subjectively feel that way and then I decide not to share anything, one, I'm not doing my job. That's one thing. Two, but I could be held liable if evidence was presented my way that I failed to provide. And I've seen it happen. And it's not that you want that divide, but it's true. I think if you got intel, it's your job to share it with them. But they can't. They're not. It's not their job to disperse it because they're not the ones that really are ultimately in control of where that evidence is going. Remember, the investigative division may do an investigation, but they're doing it on the orders of a higher level of authority. So if I went ahead and I said, hey, Joe, since you gave me this evidence, let me tell you what I'm collecting it for. I could be violating the person who authorized me to do the investigation. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, maybe there's some that they do on their own, of course. I mean, they got to be proactive as well. But a lot of their investigations are on the order of a prosecutor or administration, whatever it is. So the moment I open up a window where Joe gives me information, and I give Joe a little something back, I may have violated the trust and the integrity of the people who authorized that investigation. Right, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why preserving the integrity of the investigation is so important. If you're entrusted with it, you got to keep it close to the vest until, unless there's people that need to know.
All right, so let's do the final tip here, Joe. And this is more on the tactical side. I wanted to give a tactical, let's talk about due process from evidence gathering to maybe times. I mean, how important is it for custody to kind of understand the due process, especially if they could be the center of an investigation?
The due process is integral. Even though, here in Texas, we're not licensed peace officers, we do teach crime scene preservation, controlling the crime scene, chain of evidence. We're still responsible for that process, as far as investigations. We go over it. We teach, especially chain of evidence. If you take something, if it's a weapon, or if it's drugs, don't pass it off. The more hands that it goes through, the worse it is. It could become contaminated. We teach how to hold a crime scene, not letting anybody in or out, making sure we're taking good pictures, we're videoing, we're documenting the scene, making sure that, only authorized officials that are allowed to be at that scene are allowed in due to contamination process. Even though we're not licensed peace officers, we still teach the subjects because, like we tell them, in the grand, in the whole big picture, in the grand scheme of things, at the end, we're actually the first responders on that scene because we're the ones there at the penal institutions. We're the ones there at the prisons, and everything we do has an outcome later on down the road. So this is why we teach these subjects. This is why we cover them all the time. This is why we run scenarios. I used to actually set up cells as a crime scene, and we would take our entire shift down to the cell and do a shift briefing just on crime scene preservation. Because talking about it versus actually seeing the process and understanding the long-term outcome and the long-term effects that the job that you do today, the effects that it has down the road when it comes to prosecution, it matters.
I agree, guys. And guys, remember, most of the time we as custody, we are the first responders. So evidence collecting is big. You don't want to mess up with that because there's pressure at that point for the investigation to secure that win. And if you mess with that, collection of evidence, due process errors, whatever it is, the investigators will be given no forgiveness by those who needed that investigation to play out. So you'll see stress when it comes to that, because the investigative division, their job is to collect that evidence, and that is their role. That would be no different. I know this may sound crazy. I'm going to do a crazy comparison here, but if I was an investigator and you were doing count, and I decided to walk into your unit, open up the doors, and let the inmates go to wherever they want to go, that feeling that you would have would be the same feeling an investigator would have if you opened up a crime scene and started walking around in it and not collecting the evidence that needed to be collected in order to make sure that we have a proper due process. Some states are different. Some states, the officers could help get involved with the evidence collecting. In some states, they just shut the door. They don't get involved. So whatever your state is, what I meant to say was, if you start messing with anything related to that due process, that feeling that you would get during an investigator, in my scenario, coming through messing with your count, will be exactly that same feeling they get, because these are the highest functions that you're responsible for. Knowing where your inmates are is one of your highest. Yeah. What do you got, Joe?
Just imagine being the person, your coworker gets shanked on the job and loses their life. And because you didn't control the crime scene, you let multiple people come in due to emotional overburst, because of the loss of life. Later on down the road, that conviction gets overturned because the crime scene was contaminated. Right. Imagine being that person that has to live with that for the rest of their life. We didn't secure a conviction because we didn't control the crime scene.
Right. I agree with that, Joe. And again, that's something that hurts in the long term, especially Absolutely. Because, if there are victims, we want to bring honor to those victims.
Absolutely.
We want to make sure this plays out. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing, sir? This is a great dialogue, man.
Yeah, it was a good dialogue. And in closing, don't let the stigma of the investigative division play out in your mind. It's just that, a stigma. Every choice that we make, the way we do our jobs, every decision that we make, and every job action that we perform has an outcome. It may not be today, it may be a year from now when it goes to court. But having that good working relationship with your investigative division is crucial. Just because you have one butthole in a bunch don't let it give the persona to everybody else. Investigative division, same thing with custody. This lieutenant's a butthole. One person, one bad apple shouldn't spoil the whole bushel. So have that good working relationship. Make sure that we're practicing professionalism, that we're portraying integrity. Make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to preserve the integrity of an investigation, especially when it comes to crime scene and evidence collecting. Again, it's pivotal in a successful outcome of prosecution. So make sure that we're doing everything within our power to assist them. And just because they don't give us the little details, don't think for a minute that they're not working, busting their ass for us, because they are. They just can't talk about it. And that's something that everybody has to understand. Sometimes things aren't an open book for a reason. So, don't be judgmental of that fact. Continue to build that working relationship with the investigative division, because especially in a prison environment, is crucial. We need them just as much as they need us.
Yeah, and guys, in this business, if ego and pride gets in the way of that partnership, that's sad, because at the end, we're not operating the most effective of facilities when we allow our workplace politics, to get in the way of what needs to be done. I've worked in facilities where this relationship really is beneficial. I currently work in one now where it's truly beneficial. And I know what that outcome is of a great working relationship between investigative divisions and custody. But again, that relationship exists when people understand what those expectations are. Basically, if I give you this, I understand that you may only be able to give me this, but I'm going to still do it because I know that you're going to give me something in the end. And that's kind of what it is. If we're looking for the immediate payback, it may not happen. But a couple of years later, something you gave out a couple of years before, all of a sudden comes into fruition. And by the way, when it comes to all this, one last thing, the partnership is not based on the need to be recognized either. The partnership is truly based on doing what is right. So if you're in the investigative division and you want to be recognized, that's going to wind up causing a conflict with custody, because your need to be recognized may wind up leading you down to making some bad choices. Because I have seen people, again, I'm chasing a case that, let's just say, is not going my way. Well, I don't want to look like a fool, so I'm going to keep on doing it until I get something. No, that's not how this is supposed to roll. You're supposed to do the right thing regardless of your pride or regardless of vanity. And I think a lot of the times the reason why we tend to bump heads is because we see each other as competition or competitors, and we're not. How could we be when our livelihood is so dependent on each other? When you stand there and you see an officer or a corrupt person being taken out, how do you not show appreciation for the people that were able to make that happen? And hopefully that person does time. Because that person that came in is no longer, once they're in handcuffs, they're no longer your brother and sister. No more. They violated the rules, and someone has to be there to hold them accountable. I read something recently, or I wrote this about, investing in someone and then being disappointed when they left. But if me and Joe were best of friends, and I'll take the heat on this one, Joe, and I fuck up and I do something foolish, yeah, maybe our friendship, Joe may be like, oh, disappointed because we were friends, but Joe's not going to be mad at the people that did what they had to do. You can't let that personal relationship divide what needs to be done to hold this facility at the highest level of integrity. I'm disappointed at my friend. You fucked up. But I'm not mad at the agency for putting handcuffs on that individual and taking him out.
Yep.
That's just the way the cookie needs to crumble. As always, guys, the show is tipped. Please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.